Welcome to Inside Corporate Finance, the podcast where we break down the tools, strategies, and insights that drive smarter decisions in finance. Today, we're diving into one of the most essential skill sets in the field, financial modeling. Specifically, we're exploring the financial modeling guidelines published by CFI and Macabacus, a comprehensive playbook for building models that are accurate, transparent, and user-friendly. We'll cover the importance of modular design, starting with the outcome in mind, structuring your spreadsheets for clarity, and applying best practices for navigation, formatting, and protection. If you're involved in forecasting, valuation, treasury, or FP&A, this episode is packed with value. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and share this episode with colleagues or anyone who wants to take their financial modeling to the next level. Let's get started.
Ever feel like, when you look at financial models, they're kind of speaking a secret language, like you're missing out on some crucial conversation?
Yeah, I totally get that.
Well, get ready to decode that language today, because we're diving deep into CFI's financial modeling guidelines.
It's like having a cheat sheet to the world of, well-designed models. And by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only be able to spot a good model, from a mile away, but you'll also understand, the why behind those design choices.
So no more staring blankly at spreadsheets and pretending to understand what's going on.
Exactly.
I'm so in for this.
Yeah.
So this CFI guide, it's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
It's almost like a style guide for finance professionals. What's the first big takeaway?
So first things first, good model design. It's about way more than just aesthetics.
Okay.
Think of it as building a house.
Okay.
You wouldn't just start slapping on bricks, right?
Right.
You need a blueprint. And that's where the idea of backward design comes in.
Backward design.
Yeah.
That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
Is it as counterintuitive as it sounds?
It's actually quite brilliant.
Yeah.
Instead of diving straight into the numbers, you start with the end in mind.
Okay.
What insights do you want the model to reveal? What questions do you need it to answer? Once you've got that clear picture of your desired outcomes, then you can work backward.
Okay.
To determine the necessary inputs and calculations.
So it's like reverse engineering the insights.
Exactly.
I can see how that would lead to a more focused and efficient model.
Yeah.
Does CFI have any tips for avoiding common pitfalls in the design phase?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Backward design really helps you strike that Goldilocks balance. Not too simple.
Right.
Not too complex, but just the right level of detail to provide meaningful insights without getting lost in the weeds.
Speaking of details,
Yeah.
how do we actually go about building this well-designed model? Does CFI offer any guidance on the structure?
They do.
Okay.
And they use a fantastic analogy. Legos.
I love Legos.
It's all about modularity.
Okay.
Breaking down the model into smaller, reusable building blocks.
Right.
Kind of like those prefab Lego pieces that you can snap together in different configurations.
So we're talking about things like separate schedules for revenue, expenses, depreciation, working capital.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the all-important dashboard that brings it all together.
Exactly.
Okay.
This approach makes models easier to build,
Yeah.
easier to understand, and even easier to print in a digestible way.
Right.
Plus, you can often reuse these building blocks for future models.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, saving time and headaches down the line.
Now, you mentioned something called drivers earlier.
Yes.
I'm curious about those.
Yeah.
They sound like the key players in the model's story.
Yeah.
What exactly are drivers?
So drivers are the inputs that have the most significant impact on the model's outputs. Think of them as the steering wheel and gas pedal of your financial vehicle.
Okay, so identifying these drivers is crucial.
Yeah.
Because they're the factors that really make the model go.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's not about just plugging in any old number.
Right.
You need to understand the underlying dynamics of the business or project that you're modeling.
Right.
And pinpoint those critical inputs that truly drive the results.
This reminds me of something I've struggled with in the past. I've seen models where the creator throws in every data point imaginable,
Right.
and it's overwhelming.
And that defeats the purpose of a model, which is to simplify and clarify, not
Right.
complicate matters.
Exactly.
It's about finding that Goldilocks balance. Enough detail to be thorough,
Yeah.
but not so much that it becomes a burden.
So once we've identified these key drivers
Okay.
and built our model using our trusty Lego blocks, how do we ensure that it's actually useful to others?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, because what good is a brilliant model if no one understands it?
Right, and that's a perfect segue into presentation.
Okay.
Even the most brilliantly designed model is useless if it's not presented in a way that's clear, concise,
Right.
and accessible to your audience.
Mm-hmm.
CFI has some really insightful tips on this front,
Okay.
starting with a slightly counterintuitive suggestion for printing.
Do tell. I'm all ears for counterintuitive advice.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to making these models less intimidating.
They recommend printing the outputs,
Okay.
specifically the dashboard first,
Okay.
followed by the key drivers.
Okay.
It might seem backward,
Yeah.
but think of it like providing the executive summary up front.
So you're setting the stage.
Exactly.
Revealing the key insights and drivers that tell the story. And then providing the supporting details in the form of schedules later on.
Exactly. You're giving your audience the big picture first, allowing them to grasp the key takeaways before delving into the nitty-gritty details if they choose to.
But while it's important to highlight those key outputs and drivers,
Yeah.
CFI stresses that all schedules should be included in the printout,
They do.
even if they end up being more like a detailed appendix that most people won't even look at.
Yes, it's about transparency
Okay?
and demonstrating the rigor of the model.
Right.
Even if most people only focus on the dashboard and drivers,
Mm-hmm.
having all the underlying calculations available builds trust and shows that you've done your due diligence.
Transparency builds trust.
I like that.
Speaking of building,
Okay.
how does CFI recommend organizing all these schedules within the model itself? Is it all about separate tabs for each one?
Actually, they have a strong preference for stacking schedules vertically within a single tab, rather than spreading them across multiple tabs.
Okay.
Picture your model as a car engine.
Okay.
It's much easier to understand and troubleshoot if all the parts are together.
Right, instead of scattered all over the garage.
Okay. I'm starting to see a theme here.
Yeah.
Everything comes back to that engine analogy.
Right.
But I have to admit,
Yeah.
the idea of scrolling through a massive stack of schedules feels a bit daunting.
It can be, yeah.
Any tips for navigating this financial labyrinth?
CFI has you covered.
All right.
They recommend using what they call navigational columns,
Okay.
often in column A,
Right.
to create clear breaks between schedules.
Okay.
Think of them as signposts guiding you through the model.
So instead of getting lost in a sea of numbers, you have these visual cues to help you find your way around.
Exactly.
Okay.
They also recommend using row grouping
Okay.
to create a visual table of contents,
Mhm.
allowing you to collapse or expand sections of the stack as needed.
Nice.
And for those who love keyboard shortcuts,
Yes.
CFI suggests exploring Macabacus's Smart Print Area tool,
Oh, cool.
which streamlines the process of printing those stacked schedules.
All right. I'm starting to feel a bit more confident navigating this world of well-designed models.
Good.
But let's be honest. Sometimes formatting feels like the least glamorous part of the process.
It can be.
What's CFI's take on formatting?
Yeah.
Do they have any strong opinions?
Oh, they definitely do.
Okay.
They're big believers in consistency,
Right.
not just for the sake of aesthetics,
Yeah.
but because it builds trust in the model's reliability
Right.
and makes it easier to understand. They go into quite a bit of detail.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway is that a well-formatted model should be visually appealing,
Right.
easy to follow,
Mhm.
and free of distractions.
I'm all for eliminating distractions.
Yeah.
Especially when dealing with complex financial information.
Exactly.
What are some of the specific formatting recommendations CFI highlights?
They cover everything from font choices
Okay.
and number formats to the use of color and capitalization.
Wow.
For example, they recommend using a clear professional font like Arial or Calibri.
And avoiding lowercase letters in labels.
So it's about creating a clean and consistent look that's easy on the eyes.
Exactly.
What about dealing with those pesky zeros and negative numbers? Any tips for making them look less, negative?
CFI has a solution for that too.
Okay.
For negative numbers, they prefer using brackets instead of red font,
Right.
which they reserve for flagging errors or other important alerts.
Okay.
And for those zeros,
Yeah.
a simple dash is their go-to choice for a clean and uncluttered look.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's about maximizing visual clarity and letting the numbers speak for themselves.
Right.
What about using colors to highlight certain elements within the model?
They recommend a classic color coding scheme.
Okay.
Blue font for inputs,
Mm-hmm.
black for formulas and links within the same sheet,
Right.
and green for links to other tabs.
Okay, so it's like a visual code that helps you quickly understand the different types of information in the model.
Exactly.
Speaking of codes, what about naming cells?
Does CFI advocate for using descriptive names to make the formulas easier to understand?
That's where they get a bit cautious.
Okay.
They acknowledge that naming cells can seem helpful,
Yeah.
but it can actually make auditing the model more difficult
Okay.
because it obscures the underlying cell references.
So it's like using a secret code that only you understand.
Right.
Not very helpful for collaboration or feature updates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They prefer using standard cell references whenever possible.
Right.
But if you do encounter a model with a lot of named cells,
Okay.
they recommend Macabacus's name scrubber tool to help clean things up
Ooh.
and revert formulas back to their original cell references.
It's like a name detox for your model, removing all that unnecessary complexity.
Right.
What about using macros? Are those a no-go in the CFI world?
They're not completely off limits,
Okay.
but CFI encourages a cautious approach. They recognize that sometimes you need macros to achieve functionality.
Right.
That's beyond Excel's built-in capabilities.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
about using them strategically
Right.
and only when absolutely necessary.
Right. They encourage exploring all of Excel's built-in features
Okay.
and add-ins like Macabacus before resorting to macros.
Right.
Often there's a simpler, more transparent solution already available without having to write custom code.
So before we move on, can we quickly recap what we've learned so far?
Sure.
It seems like CFI emphasizes a clear, clean,
Yep.
consistent approach to model design.
Right.
Right, exactly.
They want you to think about the end user every step of the way,
Okay.
ensuring that the model is not only accurate,
Mm.
but also easy to understand, navigate, and audit.
It's almost like they're saying, don't just build a model, build a story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that story needs to be clear, compelling,
Right.
and trustworthy.
And well protected, right?
Yes.
We talked about those different levels of protection.
Yeah.
Right? Workbook protection,
Yep.
file structure protection,
Right.
and cell protection.
Yeah.
What are CFI's recommendations in this area?
They stress the importance of choosing the right level of protection
Okay.
based on the model's purpose
Yeah.
and the level of access you need to grant to different users.
Right.
They highlight the benefits of cell protection,
Okay.
which allows you to lock down formulas and links while leaving input cells unlocked.
So you're protecting the model's logic,
Uh-huh.
but allowing users to modify the inputs and explore different scenarios.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's all about finding that balance between security and usability.
Now, are you ready to unpack some of CFI's more visually oriented tips and techniques?
Let's do it.
I'm particularly intrigued by the mention of corkscrews and waterfalls.
Okay.
Those sound more like cocktail party conversation starters than financial modeling concepts.
Well, get ready to impress at your next cocktail party with your newfound knowledge of financial modeling visuals.
I love it. Let's go.
Okay, so these visual techniques are all about presenting information in a way that's clear, intuitive, and even a little bit elegant.
Okay.
Let's start with corkscrews, which are often used for things like long-term debt or PP&E schedules.
Okay, walk me through this.
Yeah.
How exactly does a financial corkscrew work? Is it as twisted as it sounds?
It's more about a visual flow than an actual spiral.
Okay.
Imagine you're tracking the balance of long-term debt over several years.
Okay.
You start with the beginning balance in one period, then you factor in any additions or repayments,
Yeah.
and that leads you to the ending balance for that period.
So far, so good.
Right.
But where's the corkscrew action?
So the ending balance of one period becomes the beginning balance of the next period, and so on.
Okay.
Visually, the information flows diagonally down the schedule,
Yeah.
kind of like a winding path.
I see it now.
Yeah,
It's a way to visually link the balances across time.
exactly.
Does CFI have any specific recommendations for using corkscrews effectively?
They point out that the ending balance is usually just the sum of the additions or subtractions above it.
Okay.
So you often have a Tasium function at the bottom of the corkscrew,
Right.
making it both visually clear and computationally efficient.
So it's not just a pretty picture. It's a functional element of the model.
Exactly.
Now, what about those waterfalls? Are we talking about cascading financial data here?
You got it.
Right.
Waterfalls are often used in depreciation schedules,
Okay.
and they have this distinct triangular structure.
Okay.
Imagine you're looking at a depreciation schedule for assets that are put into service in different years. Each row represents a year when assets were added,
Okay.
and the columns represent the years over which those assets are depreciated.
Okay, so you're seeing how depreciation expense is spread out over time.
Yeah.
But each year asset additions gets its own row.
Exactly.
Right.
And this creates that triangular shape,
Okay.
with the depreciation expense for older assets gradually decreasing as you move down the waterfall.
I'm starting to appreciate the power of these visual techniques.
Yeah.
It's like they're adding another layer of clarity to the model.
Mm-hmm.
But do they ever create issues with space constraints?
Waterfalls can sometimes take up more space,
Yeah.
but CFI argues that the transparency they provide is worth it. It's a
Right.
trade-off,
Yeah.
but ultimately clarity should trump compactness.
I think that's a wise approach, especially when you're dealing with something as crucial as depreciation.
Exactly.
Now let's shift gears and talk about the heart of any financial model,
Okay.
the financial statements themselves.
All right.
What are CFI's recommendations for structuring these within the model?
Their approach prioritizes simplicity and transparency.
Okay.
They recommend keeping the financial statements themselves as clean as possible,
Okay.
primarily using links to the schedules where the detailed calculations reside.
So the income statement, balance sheet, and statement of cash flows should act more as summary reports, pulling in data from the supporting schedules rather than performing complex calculations themselves.
That's the idea.
Okay.
For example, instead of calculating revenue directly on the income statement,
Right.
you'd have a separate revenue schedule
Yeah.
and link the final revenue number into the income statement. This keeps things clean and easy to follow.
And it probably makes balancing the model much easier, right?
Absolutely.
If the financial statements are just links,
Yeah.
it's simpler to track where the numbers are coming from.
Right.
And make sure everything ties together.
Yes.
No more hunting for hidden formulas.
Right. It minimizes errors.
Yeah.
And it creates a clear audit trail for every number.
Okay.
CFI acknowledges that companies might have flexibility in how they present their financial statements,
Right.
but they do recommend an order
Okay.
that can streamline the model building process.
I'm all for streamlined processes.
Yeah.
What's their recommended order for tackling those statements?
They suggest starting with the income statement,
Okay.
as it's often the most straightforward.
then move on to the balance sheet,
Okay.
and finally the statement of cash flows.
It's a logical progression.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing their advice on keeping things simple and using links applies to all three statements.
Absolutely.
Okay.
This approach not only simplifies the building process,
Yeah.
but also helps with balancing the model,
Right.
which can be one of the trickiest aspects of financial modeling.
I know many people who would agree with that statement.
Yes.
Balancing can feel like a financial puzzle sometimes,
Yeah.
but using links and separate schedules seems like it would make things less daunting.
It does. It's all about breaking down complexity, creating those clear connections,
Yeah.
and letting the numbers fall into place naturally.
Now, are you ready for a rapid-fire round of formatting tips?
Bring it on!
I'm always looking for ways to make my spreadsheets look more professional and less like a chaotic jumble of numbers.
Okay, well, get ready for some spreadsheet styling tips. CFI stresses consistency,
Wow.
not just with numbers and formulas,
Uh.
but also with the visual presentation.
Yeah.
It's all about creating a model that looks polished and trustworthy.
It's like they're saying, don't underestimate the power of a well-dressed spreadsheet.
Exactly.
Right.
They recommend using clear professional fonts
Okay.
like Arial or Calibri,
Mm-hmm.
and advise against using lowercase letters in labels.
Right.
Remember, it's all about visual clarity and readability.
Okay, so keep it clean and consistent.
Yeah.
What about number formats? Any suggestions there?
CFI recommends avoiding currency symbols
Oh.
to reduce visual clutter.
Okay.
Instead, include a clear note at the top of each sheet
Right.
to indicate the units. Remember, it's all about elegance and clarity.
No need to shout about the currency with every single number.
Right.
Now, what about those pesky negative numbers? Any tips for making them less jarring?
For negatives, CFI prefers brackets
Okay.
instead of red font,
Right.
which they reserve for errors or important alerts,
Okay.
and for zeros. A simple dash keeps things clean and uncluttered.
I'm loving these minimalist formatting tips.
Yeah.
It's all about letting the numbers shine.
Uh-huh.
What about colors? Are there any CFI-approved ways to use color effectively?
They recommend a classic color coding system,
Okay.
blue font for inputs,
Mm-hmm.
black for formulas and links within the same sheet,
Right.
and green for links to other tabs.
Okay.
It's a visual language that helps anyone using the model
Yeah.
quickly understand what they're looking at.
So we've covered fonts, colors,
Yeah.
number formats.
Yeah.
What about units? How does CFI recommend handling those within the model.
They're big fans of a dedicated units column
Okay.
that clearly states the units for each row,
Right.
eliminating any ambiguity.
Yeah.
They also suggest a global units marker at
Yeah.
the top of each sheet,
Right.
stating the default units used throughout the model.
It's like setting the ground rules for the model's language,
It's exact.
making sure everyone is on the same page from the start.
Mm-hmm.
This attention to detail,
Yeah.
from big picture design choices to the smallest formatting decisions,
Yeah.
really highlights the care that goes into building a truly great model.
It's about craftsmanship. You're not just crunching numbers, you're
Yeah.
creating a tool that others will rely on
Right.
for critical decisions.
Yeah, remember our conversation about naming cells?
Mm-hmm.
CFI prefers standard cell references.
Yes.
But they recognize that sometimes named cells are unavoidable.
Yeah, and in those cases,
Right.
they recommend Macabacus's name scrubber tool
Yes.
to help remove any unnecessary complexity
Right.
and make the model more auditable.
It's like a deep clean for your spreadsheet.
It is.
What about macros? Did CFI offer any advice on those?
They encourage a cautious approach with macros,
Okay.
recommending you explore all of Excel's built-in features and
Okay.
add-ins
Yeah.
before resorting to custom code.
Right.
Excel is constantly evolving.
So there might be a simpler, more transparent solution already available
Yeah.
without having to write custom code.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the job
Right.
and prioritizing clarity whenever possible.
Exactly.
Now, before we wrap up, I'm curious.
Yeah.
Did anything in particular stand out to you from all of these CFI recommendations?
For me, it's the constant emphasis on clarity, transparency, and the user experience.
Yeah.
It's about remembering that a financial model is more than just a collection of numbers.
Yeah.
It's a communication tool,
Right.
a story waiting to be told.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like CFI is saying, don't just build a model, build a bridge. A bridge that connects the numbers to the people making decisions.
Exactly.
But there's one crucial element CFI doesn't explicitly cover in their guidelines that I think is essential to highlight.
Oh, intrigued.
What element are we missing? It's the human element.
Oh, that's so important.
All these technical skills and best practices are crucial.
But they're only as good as the people applying them.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Financial modeling isn't just about mastering Excel.
Right.
It's about understanding your audience.
Right.
Communicating effectively.
Right.
And building trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a collaborative process that requires empathy,
Yeah.
active listening,
Right.
and the ability to explain complex concepts in a way that everyone can understand.
Absolutely.
But let's delve a little deeper into this human side of financial modeling. So we've talked about making models clear and user-friendly.
Uh-huh.
But what about making sure they stay that way over time?
Right.
That's where documentation comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's like the instruction manual for your masterpiece.
You hit the nail on the head.
Like,
Even the most elegant model
Yeah.
can turn into a black box without proper documentation.
Right.
Imagine someone trying to use your model a year from now with no clue how it works
Right.
or what assumptions you made.
It would be like finding a treasure map without the key.
Exactly.
So what makes for good documentation? Where do we even start?
First and foremost,
Yep.
you need a clear and concise explanation of the model's purpose and scope.
Okay.
What's it designed to do? What questions does it answer?
Mhm.
And what are its limitations?
So it's like giving the reader a roadmap before they even dive into the numbers.
Exactly.
What else should we include in this financial instruction manual?
Don't forget to clearly state any key assumptions you made,
Right.
along with like the reasoning behind them.
Okay.
Assumptions can have a huge impact on the model's results.
Yeah.
So transparency is key.
It's about showing your work, not just the final answer.
Right.
Are there any other elements we should consider?
Absolutely.
Okay.
A glossary of key terms and acronyms is essential,
Right.
especially if you're working like a specialized industry or using a lot of technical jargon.
Yeah.
You want to make sure everyone's speaking the same language.
I've definitely been lost in translation a few times when looking at models from different industries. Yeah, I get that.
Any other tips for making documentation more user-friendly?
Don't be afraid to use visuals.
Oh, okay.
Diagrams, charts,
Yeah.
even screenshots can be incredibly helpful in explaining complex concepts.
Yeah.
Remember, a picture's worth 1,000 words,
Right.
especially when it comes to financial modeling.
I'm a visual learner, so I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
What about organization? How do we make sure this documentation is easy to navigate
Right.
and doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Make sure your documentation is easily accessible and well organized.
Okay.
Consider using like a dedicated tab for documentation within the model,
Right.
or even creating a separate document that accompanies it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And whatever you do, don't bury important information deep within the model
Right.
or use cryptic file names.
So treat your documentation with the same care and attention to detail
Exactly.
that you give the model itself. It's all part of the package.
Yeah, but isn't documentation a bit of an ongoing process?
It is.
Models change and evolve over time.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Documentation is not a one-time task.
Okay.
It's an ongoing commitment.
Right.
You need to review and update it as the model changes to ensure it remains accurate and relevant.
It's like tending a garden.
Yeah.
You need to nurture and maintain it over time to reap the rewards.
Exactly.
And speaking of rewards, what are some of the benefits of investing in good documentation?
Well-documented models are easier to understand, easier to audit, and easier to maintain over time.
Right.
They promote collaboration, reduce errors,
Right.
and ultimately build trust with stakeholders.
It sounds like documentation is the unsung hero of financial modeling,
It really is.
the glue that holds everything together.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of financial modeling,
Okay.
what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
I hope they walk away with a deeper appreciation for the art and science of financial modeling. It's not just about crunching numbers.
Right.
It's about crafting a clear and compelling narrative
Yeah.
that informs decisions and drives success.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about building bridges between data, analysis, and human understanding. And it all starts with a solid foundation of design principles,
Yep.
best practices,
Yeah.
and a healthy dose of human empathy.
And let's not forget the importance of documentation.
Right.
That's the key to ensuring that your models remain valuable and relevant for years to come.
So the next time you see a financial model, don't just see numbers.
Okay.
See a story waiting to be unlocked,
Yeah.
a conversation waiting to happen.
And remember, the best models are more than just tools. They're powerful instruments of communication, collaboration,
Yeah.
and insight.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you've gained valuable knowledge and a newfound appreciation for the fascinating world of financial modeling.
Until next time, happy modeling.